After that night, I couldn't shake the image of that face. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hollow eyes staring back at me, the whisper of my name lingering in the back of my mind. It didn't matter if it was day or night. I felt it watching me, always just out of sight. The following evening, I tried to avoid the hallway. I kept to the downstairs rooms, forcing myself to read or watch TV, anything to distract myself. But even there, in the warm light of the living room, I felt cold. That creeping chill seemed to follow me, wrapping itself around me like a shadow I just couldn't shake. And then the whispers came. At first, it was only one voice, faint, distant, but soon it multiplied. A chorus of murmurs filled the room, echoing all around me, too soft to understand, but loud enough to send shivers down my spine. I clutched my blanket tighter, willing them to stop. Please, please, just stop, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. And for a moment, they did. The room went silent, the air thick and heavy. I felt a flicker of relief, but it was short-lived. Slowly, I became aware of a presence behind me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. A cold, heavy sensation pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard for me to breathe. I didn't want to look. I knew I shouldn't, but something compelled me. It's as if it took a hold of my mind, forcing me to turn my head. I glanced over my shoulder, and there it was. Just a few feet away, standing in the dim corner of the room, was a figure. It was more solid this time, its form sharp and menacing, pale skin, hollow eyes, and an expression of twisted enrage. Its mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but that felt like a scream in my mind. I bolted upright, stumbling back and nearly tripping over my own feet, my heart pounding as I tried to find the door, but the figure didn't move. It only watched, its gaze following me as I backed away. "Get out," I hear it say, the voice so low it was almost a growl. I ran upstairs, slamming the door to my bedroom, my whole body shaking. I pressed my back against the door, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. I could still feel it, the weight of its presence lingering in the house. I crawled into bed, pulling the blankets up to my chin, praying that sleep would come. But as I lay there, the whispers returned, circling my bed, filling the room like a dark fog. And then, just as I started to drift into an uneasy sleep, I heard it again. My name, so close I could feel the cold breath against my ear. I barely slept last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear it. A faint, raspy voice right beside my ear, whispering my name. By morning, I felt like a ghost myself, drained and pale, my mind haunted by visions of that twisted face. I told myself I'd leave the house to get some fresh air, maybe even spend the night at a hotel. But as soon as I walked towards the front door, the air around me turned icy, and the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a windstorm. It felt as if the house itself was holding me back, refusing to let me go. Shivering, I forced myself to breathe, to take control of myself. "It's just a house," I whisper, more to myself than anything else. But even as I said it, the walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows stretching and warping like living things. I turned, intending to go back upstairs, but something cold gripped my arm, halting me mid-step. It was as if an invisible hand had wrapped itself around my wrist, fingers digging into my skin. I gasped, twisting my arm, trying to shake it off, but the grip only tightened, pulling me backwards. Desperate, I yanked my arm free, stumbling and nearly falling. I glanced down, expecting to see bruises where I'd felt the grip, and there they were, 5 faint, finger-shaped bruises darkening on my wrist. My stomach twisted, and then I heard it, a voice, clear and close. It was as if someone was standing right beside me. "You don't belong here," it says. The voice echoed throughout the hallway, each word dripping with venom. I backed up, my feet moving on their own, my gaze darting back and forth around the room, trying to find the source. But the house was empty, or at least it looked that way. And then from the corner of my eye I saw it, the figure, lurking in the shadows just beyond the staircase. This time, it wasn't just standing still. It was moving, gliding towards me with an unnatural slowness. It was as if it was savoring each step. Its eyes, locked on mine, hollow and filled with a cold, unrelenting rage. I panicked. I ran upstairs, my footsteps echoing as I slammed my bedroom door and pressed my back against it. I tried to catch my breath, but the air felt thick, heavy, as if the whole house was closing in on me. And then the whispers started again, louder this time, filling the room. They weren't just murmurs anymore, they were sharp, insistent, angry. "Get out," they say. The voice rose to a scream, echoing around me. And in that moment, I felt something cold press against my back, as if the ghostly figure was right there, just inches away. My heart raced as I realized that I couldn't stay in this room, or in this house for any matter. But as I reached for the doorknob, I felt that icy grip again, this time on my shoulder, tightening painfully. I could barely breathe as the whispers grew louder, the voice right against my ear filled with fury. "Leave, or suffer," it says. And then, just like that, the grip released, and I stumbled forward, gasping, my mind reeling over what just happened. I need to get out of here. The next morning, I could barely hold my coffee. My hands trembled as I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the bruises that now marked both my wrist and shoulder. Proof that what I'd felt was real. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I decided I needed to do something. Running was no longer an option, not without knowing what was here and what it wanted. But how could I explain any of this to anyone without sounding unhinged? If I wanted help, I needed proof, something undeniable. I dug out an old recorder I used in college for lectures and set it on the kitchen counter, pressing record. I sat in silence, waiting, barely breathing as I listened to the house. At first, there was nothing, just the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock. But then, after what felt like an eternity, there was a faint whisper. "Leave." It was the same voice from last night. A cold shiver raced down my spine. I checked the recorder, making sure the red light was still on, and then sat back, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle my breathing. The whisper came again, louder this time, as though it had noticed my efforts. "Why won't you leave?" I felt my skin prickle. I tried to ignore it, to focus on getting the recording, but the pressure in the room was building, like a storm gathering right above me. I decided it was time to dig deeper into the house's history. Maybe there was something, some reason for all of this. I spent the rest of the day at the library, poring over dusty records, historical photos, anything that mentioned the house. I learned that it had once belonged to a wealthy family, but they'd left it under mysterious circumstances. It was sold and resold several times, but the records always stopped abruptly, as though something about the house had been purposely erased. By evening, I returned, weary and unsettled, but determined. I had to know who this figure was. I checked the recorder as soon as I got back, my fingers trembling as I replayed the recording. At first, all I could hear was my own breathing and the faint ticking of the clock. But then, there it was, a chilling, unmistakable voice, barely more than a whisper, but distinct. "Leave, or stay and suffer." A thrill of terror shot through me, but it was mixed with a strange satisfaction, though. Finally, proof. That night, I set up my phone camera, propping it up on the foot of the bed. I kept the light dim, just enough to make out shapes, and pressed record before crawling under the covers. The room was still and silent, but the weight of the house felt closer, heavier, as if something was watching. Hours passed, and I drifted between sleep and waking, jumping at every sound. And then, in the early hours of the morning, something changed. I heard it again, a creak, faint but purposeful, moving towards me in steady, deliberate steps. I forced my eyes open, peering into the darkness, and there it was, the shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. My camera was still rolling, and I prayed that it was catching every second. The figure tilted its head, its mouth opening as if it was going to speak, but instead, it let out a low, agonizing wail. The sound rattled through me, and I squeezed my eyes shut, covering my ears as I felt a cold rush of air sweep over me. When I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone, but the air was thick with the scent of smoke and something else. Decay. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, and stopped the recording, unable to look at it just yet. But I knew I had something. Maybe now someone would believe me. I just hoped I could hold out long enough to find someone who could make it stop. The video was almost too much to watch. Every time I replayed it, I felt that familiar chill, reliving the terror of seeing that figure standing so close, staring at me with its hollow eyes. But I had my proof. There was no denying it now. I couldn't face this thing alone. I spent hours scouring the internet, searching for anyone reputable enough to take me seriously and experienced enough to help. Finally, I found a group of paranormal investigators with a long list of documented cases. They weren't far, and they were known for capturing real evidence and confronting whatever they found. I sent them an email last night, attaching the audio and video files, hoping they'd be convinced. To my relief, I got a response by morning. Their lead investigator, a woman named Sarah, called me, her voice steady but cautious as she asked me about my experiences, listening without a hint of disbelief. When she said that they could be at the house by the end of the week, I almost cried in relief. The days leading up to their visit were unbearable. The activity seemed to escalate, the whispering growing louder, more insistent, following me from room to room. Objects began to move on their own, books sliding off the shelf, chairs shifting in the dining room, doors creaking open even when I locked them. The day finally arrived. I stood by the front door waiting for Sarah and her team to arrive, my pulse racing with a mix of fear and anticipation. When they pulled up, I felt a surge of relief. The team was small. Sarah, a tech expert named Mark, and a medium named Emily. As they entered the house, I could see the way they exchanged glances, subtle nods of recognition. Emily closed her eyes briefly, her face tightening as she stepped inside. "There's something here," she whispers. "It's watching." Mark wasted no time setting up cameras and audio recorders throughout the house. They wanted to document everything, to catch the entity in action. Sarah asked me to walk them through the house, to show them the spots where the activity had been the strongest. When we reached the hallway outside my bedroom, Emily paused, her eyes darting around as though she could see something none of us could. She touched the wall, fingers trembling slightly. "It's angry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's tied to this place, and it doesn't want us here." Mark's recorder suddenly crackled, a faint, garbled whisper filtering through the speakers. "Leave." I felt my stomach drop. I recognized that voice immediately. Sarah looked at me, her expression tense but determined. "We're going to stay here tonight," she said. "Whatever's here, we'll face it together." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, but as the sun began to set, casting long shadows around the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that whatever haunted this place wasn't just going to let us walk in and take it down without a fight. Night descended like a shroud, plunging the house into a deep, oppressive silence. Mark had cameras in every corner, infrared devices and motion sensors set up throughout the rooms, each casting an eerie red glow that only made the shadows seem darker. Emily took the lead, her hand trembling as she held the flashlight. Sarah and Mark followed close behind, their faces tense but resolute. I stayed with them, my every nerve on edge, the fear pulsing like a drumbeat in my chest. The first sign of activity started in the living room. Emily was the first to feel it, her breath hitching as she looked towards the empty corner where I'd seen the figure. "It's here," she whispers, her voice tight. A faint shuffling sound echoes throughout the room, and suddenly the temperature drops. Mark's breath comes out in a visible puff, his eyes widening as he checks the thermometer. "It just dropped 15 degrees, he says, as Sarah's camera begins to flicker. In the corner, a shadow begins to take form, hazy at first, but sharpening until it stood stolid, blocking out the light. It was a figure. The hollow, dark eyes, twisted face, its expression filled with a deep and ancient rage. Emily stumbles back as the figure turns its gaze towards her, locking eyes as if it recognizes her intrusion. A low, guttural growl fills the room, bouncing off the walls, and in a heartbeat, the figure rushes forward, sweeping past us with a force so intense it knocked us to the ground. Emily screams, clutching her head as if in pain, her body trembling as she whispers, "It's trying to push us out. It hates us being here." As if on cue, the heavy, ornate mirror hanging in the hallway shatters, sending glass raining down like frozen rain. Each shard glistens in the dim light, casting fractured reflections, making the shadows seem alive. Sarah was shaking as she grasped my arm, her voice urgent. We need to regroup. This is beyond anything we've ever dealt with. But there was no escaping it now. From every corner, the whispers began, louder and more insistent, swirling around us like a cyclone. They weren't just voices anymore. They were screams, angry and desperate, pleading and cursing in languages none of us could understand. Mark's equipment began to malfunction, the screens glitching as if something was interfering with the electronics. His camera cut in and out, and on the screen the figure appears and disappears, flashing in different parts of the house, moving impossibly fast, but always a step ahead. Emily clutches her head again, tears streaming down her face. It's everywhere, she chokes us out. It wants us gone. It's not going to let us rest. Sarah tried to pull her up, her face pale, but Emily's eyes had gone glassy, as if she was looking at something none of us could see. She reaches out, her hand shaking as she points towards the staircase. It's coming, she says. I could barely breathe as we turn, looking up at the staircase, where the figure now stands at the top, its form now clearer than ever. It has an aura of hatred that pulsates around it like a dark flame, and as it begins to descend, I could feel the weight of every step pressing down on us, as if trying to crush the life out of us. We stumble back, moving as fast as we can towards the door, but as we reach it, the door slams shut. The figure was at the bottom of the stairs now, only feet away, its hollow eyes fixed on us, its mouth twisting in a vicious smile. Mark throws himself against the door, pounding desperately, but the figure only laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that rattles the walls and seems to pierce straight into our heads. The lights flicker, casting jagged shadows that seem to crawl along the walls, and the air fills with the stench of decay. Emily collapses to the floor, her body shaking, whispering to herself, "It won't let us go. It won't ever let us go." In the chaos, Sarah pulls out a small crucifix, holding it up with trembling hands, her voice breaking as she begins to pray. For a moment, the figure pauses, its form flickering as if the light of the crucifix was too bright. But then it surged forward, a dark wind that extinguished the glow, plunging us into darkness once again. The night seemed to stretch on forever, each second an eternity of horror. By the time the dawn's light finally breaks through the windows, the figure had vanished, but its presence lingered, a heavy, oppressive weight pressing down on every corner of the house. None of us spoke. Emily was too shaken to stand, her eyes blank, haunted by visions she couldn't escape. Mark's hands were bleeding, raw from pounding at the door, his face pale as he stares into the distance, unseeing. Sarah's shoulders are slumped, her gaze fixed on the floor, as if the weight of the house's horror had broken something deep inside her. We were changed, each and every one of us marked by the night, and as we finally stumbled out of the house into the cold morning air, I couldn't help but feel that it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The house had let us go for now, but I knew somehow that it wasn't done with me yet. Hey guys, I want to thank you for listening in. If you enjoyed today's story, be sure to let me know down below in the comments. Let me know what you think about the story and its characters, as I really, really enjoy writing about them. I try to capture the emotions and fear that they feel in the moment and make you take part in that feeling as well. Tell me what you would do in Claire's situation. I'm curious to know about that. Thanks a bunch, and I'll see you in the next one.